What initially sparked your interest in using earned value management within your projects? Was there a specific, challenge on a project, or what was it that brought you to that?
The origin of this whole thing was the fact that our company went through a major restructure in 2021, and we became an ESOP company. And our auditor really wanted us to display and show these earned value management metrics as part of the auditing process of our projects and justify how do you come up with your earned value? How do you come up?
Did you know that earned value management, or EVM, is often seen as just a budgeting tool, but can actually reshape how AEC teams lead projects from start to finish? In today's episode, we're joined by Lynn Browning, PE PMP Director of Project Management at Henderson Engineers. Lynn's going to talk about his journey to help implement earned value management at Henderson in a way that is practical for their project managers and useful, which is very difficult to do. He's also going to touch on the Schedule Performance Index, or SPI, which is a helpful red flag for PMs. And he's also going to talk about something at the end of the show that he thinks all PMs should be focused on, regardless of their experience. If you're new to EVM or you're looking to embed it more deeply into your workflows, this episode is going to offer a lot of practical strategies to really help you use it right away. Now, before we jump in, I do want to tell you about our AEC PM Connect event, which is built for project managers who want to improve project delivery, communication, and leadership through practical sessions and tools. These events provide an avenue to connect with leading project managers in our industry. Visit aecpmconnect.com and register today. We currently have events in Kansas City and New Jersey, with more coming soon. I'm your host, Anthony Fasano, and this is the AEC Project Management Podcast. Let's do it. Strong leadership drives strong projects. Become an AEC PM professional and give your team the leadership skills they need to thrive. Customize PM development, premium content, and a leadership edge that sets you apart. Learn more at aecpm.com. All right, now I'd like to welcome our guest onto the show for today. Lynn Browning is a PE, PMP, Director of Project Management at Henderson Engineers. Lynn, welcome to the AEC PM podcast.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. Super excited.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. We're going to dive into a really important topic here in earned value in just a few minutes. And Lynn has been really instrumental in helping us get our AEC PM Connect event kicked off, which was our first one last year out in Kansas City. We're doing it again this year, and he's going to be doing a deeper dive this year on earned value. So we're happy to have him come on the podcast kind of ahead of that and talk about it here. And Lynn, maybe we can start out by having you share a little bit about your background and kind of and the path that kind of led you to your current role as Director of Project Management at Henderson.
Sure. My story's been kind of a winding story, but prior to jumping into becoming an engineering, going to college to get my architectural engineering degree, I worked as an electrician. So I worked out in the trenches, out in the fields, in the building, and was getting my hand practically in the weeds and things. And I honestly got tired of being out in the heat and the cold. So that's what made me go back to get my engineering degree. And I graduated from Kansas State University in 2008, moved here to Kansas City and started with Henderson. And so I started off as a designer. And the first 4 years was pretty much focused on growing my depth of knowledge of what it is of engineering across our different disciplines. And then I sat and got my PE. And then I started seeing that our projects were not being led very well. Project management here at Henderson back in those days was pretty much just an ad hoc thing that people just did. And you expected one of your engineers to just kind of step up and manage the project. But it was always, people that were doing too many things, wearing too many hats. And so it wasn't done very effectively. And so I just started stepping up into it. And because I was like, I can't let this fail. This is my project. I've got pride in this. And I'm going to make sure this happens. And what I realized was I love solving problems. That's why I'm an engineer, right? Engineers love solving problems. Well, what's the ultimate problem? Well, people, right? Relationships. Those can be the ultimate problem. And so I kind of fell in love with project management from that standpoint of just being able to interact and navigate the different relationships and the constraints and the expectations, spoken and non-spoken. And so as I started to grow in project management, I started to see a need across the company for standardization of project management practices and also the concept that project management is a very specific skill set. And so in 2020, we stood up this concept of a director of project management, and I stepped into it and I started working with the company and the executive leaders, along with other leaders throughout the firm, bringing project management as a discipline to the company and building out the PM job family. And that's what I've been doing since 2020, pretty much. So great time to shift to a new role, right? 2020 pandemic, great
Yeah.
time to start a new job.
Well, first of all, I really like your career trajectory because you went from being like out on the site, actually working on projects to getting into the design of them and then getting more into the management and the project management side of it. So you really kind of got to see, it sounds like projects from, really in the order you should see them, in my opinion, because when you get out in the field, I think in the beginning, you really kind of, like you say, get your hands dirty and understand how things are put together,
Yeah,
which is
I
valuable.
I find any of our engineers that have practical, installation experience, getting their hands dirty, are a lot more functionally better engineers because they understand how things pull together. They understand the flow on a construction site, and usually they have a leg up on other engineers, at least at the beginning.
Yeah, it's a big plus for sure. And I think the other thing that I think is really interesting about what you said with Henderson and the idea of this PM job family is it's definitely something in our industry that is an issue. I call it the PM identity crisis, which is a lot of people are like, I'm an engineer and I'm a project manager type of thing, right? They don't necessarily focus on one or the other, or that they kind of get lumped together. But I think that having like a separate job family there at Henderson, and I know you even have professionals that are strictly project managers in your organization, which is also kind of rare, I think, in the AEC industry, is good because it does like signify the importance of project management. And, it's not just something that you do, oh, by the way, with everything else. Now, I understand that in a lot of companies, you will do the engineering and do some project management, but, the value of having people that are really focused on the management of your projects is certainly going to be seen throughout your organization, from revenue to other aspects of it.
You talk about identity. We're rolling out some new PM education programs that we're bringing to some of these younger PMs. And through that process, they're going through this education program. And a lot of them come in with that I'm either an admin if they're non-traditional PMs, or they're an engineer. And that is kind of their professional identity. But usually at the end of the PM education program, they start to feel connected to that PM identity and they start to take that on, and when they actually apply it to their project teams, we're seeing increases in client experience, increases with employee engagement, and financial increases, right? Better profitability, more revenue. So it's kind of ticking up all three boxes, having someone focused, and that is their only job on project leadership.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. So, what initially sparked your interest in using earned value management within your projects? Was there a specific, challenge on a project, or what was it that brought you to that?
Oddly enough, the origin of this whole thing was the fact that our company went through a major restructure in 2021 and we became an ESOP company. So we were privately held, but all the owners sold the company to all the employees at that point. And so we became an ESOP. As part of that, we have to go through annual audits. And our auditor really wanted us to display and show these earned value management
Sure.
metrics as part of the auditing process of our projects and justify how do you come up with your earned value? How do you come up with how much work you have left to complete when looking at kind of projections looking forward? And so that started the query of like, well, what is earned value management? And so I started doing a deep dive into that. And soon as I did, I was like, oh my, this unlocks so many functions of project health along with resource management and forecasting that why would we not want to do it? The only issue that we have is how do we do it in a way that doesn't burden the PM with additional duties or additional work? How can we automate it? How can we leverage data to propel this forward? And yeah, that's kind of where we're at right now.
Yeah, and we work with a lot of companies like Lynn's doing project management development, and that is always the biggest thing. It's like earned value is amazing, but like we just can't figure out how to practically do it. Right. And so that's, that happens with a lot of things in life. Hey, I want to do this, but it's a hard thing to do, right?
We started doing earned value as a function many years ago, probably like 10, 15 years ago, but it was largely used underneath a accounting principle, underneath GAAP requirements of revenue recognition.
Okay.
So our PMs only updated earned value like once a month just for the purposes of recognizing revenue. And that was the only function. That was the only use case. But with earned value management and their specific leading metrics, it becomes not a function of revenue, but a function of project health. And being able to track it at a granular level gives you more fidelity and more information to use
Right.
dynamically, as opposed to just point in time static data.
Yeah, absolutely. And just so I don't make assumptions that our listeners all know what earned value is. So earned value management, if you're listening and not sure, it's basically a way that you can monitor the schedule and the budget on your project, both in the form of dollars. So you're kind of putting them on the same playing field, if you will. And the way that you can think about it, the way that we see a lot of companies, they come to us when they're monitoring their projects. What they're doing is they're running a report and they're looking at, okay, we had $10,000 for this phase of the project and we spent $5,000. And that's kind of all they look at. Yeah, we're 50% done. No, you're not. You're
Yeah.
not 50% done. You spent 50% of the money. You don't really know how much percent you're done unless you go to your team members and say, how much are we physically done with this report or this analysis? And that's where earned value allows to really get you some real scope percent complete data and then bring it into the mix. And that gives you a much better picture. So, if your company's doing what I just described, that's normal. Unfortunately, I mean, we've had companies that are like thousands of people that have come to us and said, we just kind of look at our budget and what we spent so far. Right. And that's, looking at the whole
I
picture.
I look at the schedule, I look at spent, that's all I care about, right? And it's less of a function of, well, how much scope have you completed? And working with your design staff to actually quantify what that looks like.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And just to give a little bit more insights into some of the things that you can see with earned value, maybe you can talk. We had a good conversations about this a week or two ago about the Schedule Performance Index or SPI. What is that, Lynn, and how can that be helpful for PMs?
The schedule performance index and another one called the cost performance index, SPI and CPI. Those are variants that look at when you start a project, you kind of plan out how you expect to execute that project. That's called a plan value, right? And you kind of distribute that over the dates of the project, the life cycle of the project. The SPI, the schedule performance index, looks at that plan value versus your earned value. And it's basically telling you, are you on pace to complete the project as you expect it to, right? If I planned out to complete the project in 12 months and 6 months in, I expect it to be 60% done. Earned value is a way of saying, well, did I actually hit that or not? So notice there's nothing there about spent, right? We're not tracking costs at this point. We're just tracking how fast am I completing the work successfully and in good quality compared to what I expected to as far as a plan value. The other one that most of my PMs really like is the cost performance index, which really looks at for every dollar I'm spending on a project. Now we introduce spent. For every dollar I spend, how much am I earning? And this value looks at that and goes, am I spending too much and not earning enough, or am I earning more than a dollar for every dollar I spend? That is a great metric, especially at a granular level, like a discipline level within a phase of going, is a discipline burning too hot or too cold? And if they are, what questions do I need to ask to figure out what's going on?
Yeah, what I really like about these indices is that as a PM, they give you an automatic red flag that you can dive into more, like Lynn is suggesting here. So, for example, for SPI, these indices are based on a scale of like if it's a one or less than a one or greater than a one, right? So, if it's a 1.0, which probably never happens, the project is exactly on schedule.
You're perfect.
If it's above one, the project is ahead of schedule. And if it's under one, that's where the red flag can come up and says, hey, we're behind schedule. And then, as Lynn said, you can really dive in and figure out, why, and then try to get back on track. And then with the cost performance indice, the same, like Lynn is saying, if you realize that for every dollar you spend, you're getting 75 cents worth of value, that's not good. And you need to dig into that and figure out why. On the other hand, maybe you're getting $1.10 for every dollar you're spending. So you're doing a good job. So I just like them because project management can be so complicated, but these give you very quick ways to get a quick kind of pulse or a heartbeat on the schedule and the budget of your project, these indices. And again, if you use a spreadsheet or use a system, there could literally be like a red flag or a red cell that pops up if it goes under one, and then you can investigate it more.
Correct. And honestly, you automate it. These are just, inputs from other systems or within your Excel file. It is really easy to calculate these values and track them over time. So,
Yeah,
yeah, I highly encourage you don't even have to implement earned value management to really start you leveraging these two metrics.
for sure. And the one thing too, just to know about earned value, if you haven't used it before, is yes, there are systems and software that you can use to help you with earned value management, but you will have to input your scope percent complete because no computer is going to be able to know that because it comes from your team. So if your team is working on a $10,000 engineering report and you spend $5,000, like we said earlier, you're going to have to actually sit down with your team and say, okay, the report says we spent $5,000. What percentage? Actually, probably I wouldn't even tell them. I would just say what
Yeah,
percentage,
exactly.
what percentage are we done? And if they say we're 40 or 30%, you're like, oh gosh, we're only 30% done. And we spend 50%. Or if they say we're 75% done, hey, we're doing really great, right? So that's just one thing to note is that you will need there's some manual entry that's involved, but it's going to be worth your time because you're going to get a real true representation of where you're at on your projects.
Not to go down the rabbit hole too deep here on this subject, but what I advise a lot of my PMs to do is in the planning stage of your project, develop what your workflow is, and then weight the tasks of those workflows appropriately so that as you're executing the work, you're checking off these tasks, you're generating a percent complete by doing that. And so then you've actually got a quantifiable way of kind of saying, yeah, I've completed 6 of my 10 tasks to complete this $10,000 project, and that equates to $7,000. So I'm 70% complete. Great. And you only spent 5,000? Happy days. You've shown now how you came up with that percent complete. So if you incorporate your workflow and how you plan to execute the work and your scope into that, it makes it a lot easier to come up with that percent complete in a not super subjective way.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that's why in our PM development programs, we always tell PMs your scope, that's why your scope is the basis for everything you do, right? And if you spell it out with a nice detailed work breakdown structure, like Lynn's saying, you're doing work for a lot of other things because it's all right there. And it's easier to measure your progress because you're just following kind of your checklist, if you will, and you're going down, you're hitting all your project tasks. That is a big plus.
Yeah. And what I get from a lot of my PMs is, man, that takes so much time. I've already got my contract. I've got my schedule. I've got my fee. Can I just execute? Can I just go?
Right.
And it's like, no, take time to plan.
Right.
It's okay to spend the time to slow down. Bring your design leads for your specific disciplines and services in on that planning session. Get their buy-in, but spend the time up front so that you've got a plan to monitor too as you're executing the work. And when the wheels fall off, which inevitably I've not yet been on a project that hasn't had a problem, when those problems occur, you know where you're at, you see the roadmap, and you know how to either make corrections or how to deviate the scope or expand the scope to meet the needs.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. In fact, when we do our programs, we spend twice the amount of time on the planning phase of the project as
Yeah.
opposed to the other phases. And I always tell people the reason we spend so much time on the planning is because if you get everything figured out up front, you're going to avoid a lot of problems down the road on your project, right? Just like you're saying, slow down and get started kind of on the right foot.
Yeah.
So, Lynn, between you did a session for us last year at our AEC PM Connect on earned value. You're doing another one this year, so you're going to have 3 hours of your journey and everything you've gone through. But for our listeners on the podcast today, just kind of reflecting on your EVM journey, what would you say maybe were some of the key lessons and challenges that really jumped out of you in terms of the whole project, whether it was tool related, team buy-in, culture shifts? What's really has stood out to you so far in your journey?
That's a lot. I'm still in the middle of the journey. I'm kind of in that
Okay.
messy middle right now, how we're implementing it and folding it into our processes. I will say that the initial concept that we rolled out was in Excel, and largely our PMs rejected it because it wasn't tied in with all of our other data. They had to export reports out and drop it into Excel files to start generating some of these metrics like spent, and then schedule was shared out over here. And it was just very clunky and our PMs didn't like it. They didn't resonate with it, right? Our industry is going through a massive digital transformation, and it's not just in how we conduct and execute work, like in Revit or in ACC or in BIM. It's also how we operate our companies need to go through a digital transformation. And so that's where we kind of took a step back and looked at our holistically, what does our project data structure actually look like?
Hmm.
And so that forced us to kind of hit pause on just rolling out these metrics, right? Because we could roll out metrics. I mean, you can roll these out and just call it a day, but junk in, junk out, right? And so is there a way that we could integrate this in fully with our project data structure to where we get it at the different levels of like a WBS hierarchy to get more actionable granular data to our PMs without the additional burden of more work, right? And so that's kind of where we're at right now, is planning out what does a project data structure look like for our PMs that aligns with our billing structures, because we got to bill, we got to send invoices, right? We got to
Sure.
align with how our clients want those invoices to be sent out. But currently, our current kind of structure is based solely on billing. And so it's really, we're not getting the granular level that we need. And our project structures aren't really set up in a way to functionally implement earned value management uh, at a well enough. So that's kind of where we're at right now, is
Okay.
working with our data team and our finance department to go, okay, let's build out an entire data structure to where we can automate and leverage historical data to generate some of these figures preliminarily during a fee development phase. And so we can start building out these project data structures financially at the very beginning, and with automations and basically leveraging historical data to create those numbers. So kind of a bigger topic than just
Yeah,
implementing earned
for
value
sure.
management, but that's where it's all led to, of like, why do we just want to roll out Excel sheets that nobody likes and it's hard to hold them accountable? Whereas we could roll out a digital platform that is our PM interface, where it's more organically intertwined with how our PMs execute work.
Right, which I think why when you do decide to use earned value management or be more, stringent on having your PMs use it in your organization, you really need to step back at the beginning of that process, kind of to Lynn's point, and think through how you're going to do that in a way that is, number one, going to get them the information that's useful. Number two, in the least amount of work for them, because we know that if it becomes too complicated, they're just not going to do it and they're not going to use it. And then you're doing everything for nothing. But to Lynn's point, there's a lot of things you have to think about, being your invoicing structure, your ERP or whatever software that you use,
Yeah.
right? And then you always have those rogue PMs that love their spreadsheets and are using spreadsheets. So you kind of have to step back and say, how can we marry all these things together and put together, which is honestly why, and Lynn said it before, why it's been a long process that he's still kind of in the messy middle of, because it is not an easy process. It requires a lot of work and a lot of coordination, I would say, amongst different parties and different tools.
Hugely, right? And it's an executive level decision, right? Our executives have to decide, are we going to invest in spending the time, the effort, and the money to build out these data structures and these data marts and all these integrations? Is it worth it? And largely, our firm likes to be very innovative, and they are all on board with going, how can we build something new, innovative, and give our PMs the best advantage they have, which is data, and get them accurate data and make it live
Yeah,
and not static.
right.
So,
That's the other thing. It's got to be
thank,
live, which is another challenge.
which is another challenge, right? And so, yeah, I spend a lot of my time working with software developers, working with our finance department, working with our different operational departments, let alone our PMs. And through this process, I'm able to show them earned value management metrics. I'm able to educate them, but they're really going, yeah, but until I can see it, until I can touch it, until I can feel it, I don't really get what you're saying. And so as we get ready to deploy these tools, hopefully in 2026, there's going to be a whole education program, change management program around this. And I think it'll be very successful, but we just need that ability to show them the data.
Yeah, for sure. That's the whole thing, and like you said, it's you're pitching your company on investing in this process, which is, can be a lengthy process with, obviously a high reward at the end, but you gotta stick through the process and get through it, which obviously because 'cause you've been going through it. So far, and I know you're in the middle, what would you say so far has been some of the biggest benefits that you've seen from this whole process?
The biggest benefit that I've seen so far is getting our PMs to think more thoughtfully about earned value, how they calculate earned value. Like some of our PMs, they've literally said, "Well, I spent this much, so I earned this much," right? And so their earned value is just what they spent. Okay, that's not good enough. Uh, but educating them and providing them tools to make their lives easier. We just rolled out 2 years ago a workflow management platform to where now we're starting to build out those project plans that I mentioned, those kind of task level per discipline milestone, starting to build out what that means. And as we solidify on what a standard workflow is, we could then integrate it into this earned value calculation, right? So as we're scheduling staff to these tasks and we're monitoring what tasks are being worked on when, as we complete them, we're automatically generating earned value, right? Just by completing these tasks. And so that's largely what I've seen as successful, is shifting the mindset away from purely managing on hours to focusing on what am I doing for that bucket of hours? What tasks do I need completed this week versus next week versus the week after that in order to meet the deadline of the project? That mindset shift is taking hold now as we speak, which is planting the seeds for eventual earned value management in a very organic way.
I think that's great, and I think that's hugely important. Even if every single spreadsheet or software isn't working perfectly yet, if they're just starting to think about,
Correct.
scope progress in terms of percent scope complete and not just running my budget reports, that's just a game changer just from a true project management standpoint. They're starting to understand, right, the project finances, which is what you really want them to be able to do. And that's why honestly, like, even just having someone take out a piece of paper and a pen and run an earned value on a phase is just so valuable to them, right? From a project manager, like understanding that I need to really think about it. And, that's, I think, just because we do a lot of learning and development here, I'm always trying to think of ways we can really get someone to understand the concept because today, unfortunately, a lot of people are just plugging stuff into systems and getting out an output and they're not really understanding what that means.
Eh, The other thing that I'm going to point out is not only do the PMs need to understand it, the managers and the leaders of those PMs also
Yes.
need to understand it because they're the ones holding the PM accountable. That's probably been one of the largest blocks of resistance I've ran into, is those directors that oversee PMs, getting them to understand it so that they know what to look for when they're looking at their portfolio of work that they're overseeing and all the PMs involved with that. Are they all talking the same language? And so that, from a learning and development program, is what we're kind of focused on right now, is getting our PMs and our directors all speaking the same language.
That's a really, really important point that I think a lot of firms don't think about. So, give you an example of that when we build a lot of these custom programs for companies, we're building multi-tier programs, right? Like your foundations of project management and then your advanced project management. What we always recommend is that the highest level PMs go through both courses, starting with the foundations one, because if they don't learn the foundations the way your company wants them to be taught, how can they teach them to the other people that they're, mentoring and guiding there? And that's a big challenge.
Correct. So we're actually running what I'm calling a PM growth series right now here at Henderson, where we're kind of circling all of our full-time PMs are going through this program, and it's a gamified program. It's a lot of fun. It's not just set and get, and it's not just death by PowerPoint. It's a very interactive program, and so far we've seen a lot of success from it.
That's great. That's awesome. I love that. All right. So as I mentioned at our AEC PM Connect event, Lynn's going to be doing the earned value session, which is in our PM track. We actually have 2 tracks this year. He's also going to be doing a second session in our track that we have for those responsible for developing PMs in their organizations. He's going to talk a little bit about a PMO or a project management office. And this can be, depending on the size of your company, some companies have something, they call it something different, a community of excellence for project management, right? Your project management center, but essentially, you know, a team, a person, a department responsible for all things project management, your project management kind of guidelines, things of that nature. So what I wanted to ask you about today is for companies that might be looking to establish a PMO or the beginning stages of it, where would you recommend that they start, Lynn?
I recommend they start with obviously the executives, right? This has to be a corporate wide understanding as to what this means. And depending on the size of your firm, that may or may not have broad implications, right? Henderson Engineers is a little over 1,000 persons. And so as we're deciding to stand up a PMO, we are focused on something within the operations that support the structure and support the different business units. And so, as you are starting to think about what is project management for your firm and what does that mean, and how do you want to leverage the expertise of PMs, getting executive level buy in and organizing a way of how a PMO or a department of a circle of excellence, or some individual that's overseeing all the standards, how they support the business units. I think a lot of us have seen PMOs recently that are more command and control, where all PMs exist within the PMO, all business flows through the PMO. I find that as a little bit of an antiquated way of having a PMO. And I think if your PMs are attached to business units, and the closer they are to those lines of work and to the leaders of that portfolio of work, the better they are to manage the client experience, right? And we want to focus on the client experience. So as a PMO, I want to support those PMs, but I want the business units to own the work. So I think as you develop a PMO, just have a mindset of, how do I support the business functionally and provide value to the business without just command and control.
Yeah, I think that's great. And one thing that I will also add in there is that whoever the person is that you put in charge of this effort, you have to understand that it's going to be probably a decent amount of work for them. Because sometimes I see firms that they'll just take like a very active engineer or project manager and say, "Hey, on the way, by the side, on the side, we want you to kind of develop this PMO." And if you're going to get
That's not going to work. It
no,
takes a lot of time. And think about the change management too. This PMO, if you're supporting the business, it's going to be highly matrixed across all the different business lines.
right.
And if you've got a large operational group, they'll probably be leveraged across the operational group as well. And so being that highly matrixed and integrated in, that takes a lot of time and thought and intentionality that you just can't have it as a side gig. It requires a lot of strategic thinking and relationship building.
Right. So just keep that in mind when you're deciding to start this initiative and selecting the right person in your organization, and maybe eventually a group of people, depending on how big your organization is. But there's no doubt that it's a very valuable initiative, because the more consistency you can drive in project management across your organization, the better. I mean, listen, every project and client type, things are different, so there'll have to be some variation, but having like consistent practices and measures and tools is just going to help. From our experience with companies, the companies that do that well, they're the ones that are growing, more sustainably. Let's put it that way.
I will tell you that the more, I know our industry kind of brickles at this a little bit, but full-time project managers, people that are just dedicated to leading projects, delivering the client experience, and monitoring the project budgets and finances, the more that that's a full-time gig, the more the person becomes better at it, and the better they deliver across all those metrics. So if you've got full-time PMs, there needs to be some sort of support for them in the development of the standards, what good looks like, and the professional development of those individuals in full-time project management. So there's a lot of value to be driven from a PMO, just focus on those two things.
Yeah, and I know that full-time PMs probably are not the norm in a lot of companies these days in our industry. However, to Lynn's point, if what you're selling is projects, right, then you would want to make sure that you could deliver those projects the best you absolutely can. And if you can have people that are dedicated on that, it's important. Like, one of the things I always say is, like, if a coffee shop doesn't make good coffee, right? They're selling coffee. If they can't do it well, they're going out of business. So engineering companies, construction, architecture, whatever you do in this field, you're delivering those services through projects. If you can't deliver your projects well, guess what? You're not going to be a business that much longer. So having dedicated PMs or a good solid PMO, these things are only going to help you probably deliver better projects, have happier clients, and then ultimately you'll be making more profit if those two things are true. So it makes sense as an investment. I think we just don't always see that. That's the challenge.
Yeah. I like your analogy of a coffee shop. The one that I always use is, if you go to a restaurant, a high-end restaurant, you meet the maitre d', right? And the maitre d' takes you to your table. They're the ones that introduce you to your server, and your server goes to, work and takes your order, takes it back to the kitchen. They make the food, they bring it out, and you have dinner. Now, if the food is okay and the service is okay, you might go back to that restaurant, right? But if the food is poor, like, that's the final product, right? That's a deliverable.
Right.
If the food's poor, but the service is great, you might go back again, right?
Right.
But if the food is okay, or the food is good, but the service is horrible, I'm not going to go
You're
back to
not
that
going
restaurant.
back.
Even
Yeah.
though the food's great, the service is horrible. Guess what? That maitre d' is responsible for that client experience. They are responsible for that whole experience that the dinee gets at the restaurant. And so they are the project manager in this example of going, are we delivering the client experience and the service and also the dinner, the deliverable, but are we serving the client based on their needs?
Yeah, no, I like that analogy a lot. That makes you really be able to think about the value of that experience, right? The client
Yeah.
experience, which is everything, really. All right, Lynn, I got one more question for you. We call it our PM pitfalls question. So, what would you say from your experience is the biggest pitfall that you see PMs kind of fall into on their projects? And how would you recommend that they either avoid it, minimize it, overcome it? What would you say to that?
So I'm gonna throw out. I don't know if this is an odd one. Maybe you tell me if you've heard of this one before. But I think the biggest pitfall that I've seen with some of our younger PMs are fully underestimating the power of professional relationships,
Hmm.
of underestimating of every interaction that they have, of just not nurturing or cultivating those professional relationships fully in the way that they should be. A lot of the times, the younger PMs will develop relationships for the purpose of business development, right? I'm going to focus up and booze up against the architect or the owner for the purposes of trying to gain some more work. But it's also, you also got to think about your internal team, right? Your engineers, your finance team, your admins of your architects or owners that you work with, the permit advisor that's out there. All these relationships, if you cultivate them, they will bring dividend back to you throughout your career. Because the AC industry, I mean, honestly, is a very small industry and everybody knows everybody kind of. And as you go into working in different areas of the country, different permit offices, they tend to remember those that work well with them, right?
Yeah.
And so to avoid this pitfall, I always say, be proactively human, right? We're not here to sell something. We just want to be our true selves and just develop the relationships organically. Some people you'll hit it off and it'll be great. Some people you're just like, we don't get along. That's fine. You have the professional relationship and you move on. But cultivating and just being intentional with those relationships, super, super important. And the last one is building trust before you need it, right? It's like building your network before you need to lean on that network is super critical. And so as a young PM, just focus on building trust with those different stakeholders on your projects. Even if you may never do work with them again, they might show up.
Yeah.
I had an architect that I worked with 12 years ago recently show up and was like, hey, I want to do work with Henderson again. I'm at a new firm. I'm ready to come together and I've got this portfolio of work. I want Henderson because Lynn, I know you. And it's like, great, let's do it.
Yeah.
I
That's
hadn't
great.
talked to the person in like 5 years. So it's just respect those professional relationships at all levels with all stakeholders. That'd be my advice.
Yeah. I think that's great. I think that, you know, what I always tell PMs is that most of the companies in our industry, they're either going to survive or not based on the amount of repeat work that they get, right? And as PMs, you're the one, it's not the business development people. You're the one getting the repeat work. Because if you build a relationship and deliver a great project and you're honest with that person, they're going to come back, like Lynn's saying, and say, hey, I want to work with you again, right? And so I know we don't always think about ourselves as business developers or doing sales, but in essence, relationships are everything, especially in this industry. And to Lynn's point, don't think it's too early to start building them, right? Even if you just graduated, it doesn't matter. I always tell people from the time you graduate to the time you retire, you should be building your network, building your relationships. And you're the PM. That's why we say PMs are the cash flow engine of these companies because they're the ones delivering the work, but also getting more if they do good delivery.
I'm also going to say this. They also lead your employee engagement. They are on the front lines of how your employees perceive working with the firm. Yeah, they've got managers and the PMs may not be the people managers, but who are they working with more? Designers tend to work with PMs a lot more than their people managers. And so those PMs, how they plan and how they interact with their internal project teams heavily influence an employee's engagement. And I've seen it where we've had great client focused PMs, but horrible project leaders internally, and project teams don't want to work with them and they kind of shy away. And that person gets a bad reputation internally. And it usually ends very poorly for everybody. So focus on your internal team as much as you do your external team as well.
Yeah, no doubt. Great advice. Well, once again, Lynn Browning. Lynn is a PEPMP Director of Project Management at Henderson Engineers. If you're able to make our AEC PM Connect event in Kansas City on October 28th, 2025, you'll get to meet Lynn. He's going to be doing multiple sessions there. He's been a great contributor in helping us to really get this event going and growing. And you can find out more about the event at aecpmconnect.com. You can certainly find Lynn on LinkedIn and connect with him. And Lynn, thank you so much for spending some time with us here on the AEC PM podcast.
Thank you very much. Very excited to see you guys in October. So,
all right. Thanks, Lynn.
Appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Lynn. He is a great project manager and he's doing great things. And we're so excited to have him speak at our AEC PM Connect event. And again, if you're interested in attending, check out aecpmconnect.com. We'd love to have you there. Until next time, please subscribe to our channel here. We will continue to put out videos like this on a weekly basis to help engineers become better project managers and leaders. I'll see you next week.